the narrow scope of ethics. And so I find it interesting that after, again, decades now of women of color, for the most part, having been, and white feminists and LGBTQ scholars, really opening up these conversations, challenging the logics of technologies, that now those women are largely being erased from that history. And of course, it has been women journalists who have done so much to translate a lot of our work. I mean, I'm particularly grateful to the women journalists who have made my work visible over the last few years. And the words that we might have used and have been using from these other paradigms, like justice, like inequality, oppression, liberation, possibility, are radically being reduced, in my opinion, to very narrow frameworks, philosophical frameworks of ethics. What that allows us to do when that happens is to erase, again, conceptually, other paradigms that should be in consideration. And for me, I'll tell you, when I first wrote, I proposed to Eileen Kalish, my editor at NYU Press, the title for my book, Algorithms of Oppression. She was like, girl, no. First of all, nobody knows what an algorithm is. So that tells you how long I was writing this book. And then, over the years, people have said things like, well, why don't you say, why don't you use words like diversity or, freedom? And I think, again, using words like diversity and equity and inclusion, which are often also attached to other words like fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics, again, puts us in a very narrow paradigm. And I think also has us attributing the source of our concerns to the individual practices, the individual practices of programmers, the individual practices of people in the C-suite in tech companies, the individual consumer practices, rather than, I think, as Nick talked about yesterday so brilliantly, and let me just say it's incredibly unnerving to sit before a room of all my heroes and speak, but when we talk about ethics, I find it interesting again that the kind of new emergent voices around ethics are kind of the ex-tech reformists, the new kind of ex-tech evangelists who are, in their own ways, I guess, trying to atone for their sins, I'm not sure. But these are the voices that are on Good Morning America, for example, last week, talking about, their rigorous research of putting Post-it notes all over their office and looking for slogans to talk about the downgrading of society, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So these are the kinds of things that I think, again, are starting to take center stage in the conversation about ethics. And one of the things that I love and appreciate so much about Kate's presentation in kind of helping us reframe is that these political struggles over the classification of knowledge and ideas have been with us since the beginning of human beings recording and documenting our histories. So these are old library questions, for example, about the politics of knowledge and the relationship, the relational kind of data. They didn't call it data when they were organizing scrolls, but this idea of whose knowledge is captured in what context and how does it get redeployed. And I think that the framework of ethics is one that we should put on the table and challenge maybe.